I'm a trained observer. I've noticed that you might be Scottish, so you've probably got a special interest in this case. But what an extraordinary development. In a way, not entirely unexpected, but now that it's happened, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, the Queen of Scotland, the First Minister, the most powerful politician probably Scotland has ever seen, now currently in a police station being interviewed, being interrogated about £600,000 worth of party funds that's gone missing. It's really falling apart at the seams for the SNP, isn't it?
My, how the mighty have fallen. I mean, the ramifications, regardless of what happens with the investigation, the ramifications are huge. The SNP are beginning to tank in the polls. There's a loss of trust. It feels almost like the last days of Citing analogy with this party. Now, this is also, we're running into elections, general election next year, where the SNP could quite easily lose about half of their seats based on current polls. And this investigation is likely to rumble on, so it might actually get worse. It feels to me that the Scottish public, not just on this particular issue, but on other issues as well, see the SNP government as being run out of steam. They've been in power for a long time. They've been incredibly successful election-winning machine for a number of years, not just in terms of general elections, Westminster, but also the cycle of elections for Holyrood as well. But it feels like their time is up. And actually, the beneficiaries of this could be the Labour Party. And if Labour steal, well, not steal, but take, say, half of the SNP seats in Scotland, that gives Starmer a real opportunity at the next general election. At the moment, the beneficiaries are also the Tories as well, because this story is taking the heat off their problems at the same time. So it feels to me, and who knows what will happen out of this investigation, but there is a bigger picture here. We're getting very, very close to some major elections. And the SNP, their power in Scotland, which has gone on for almost 2 decades, it feels like this may well be the final straw for them in terms of where they were at with election success.
And important to stress that neither Nicola Sturgeon nor her husband Peter Murrell, former SNP chief executive, and the party treasurer Colin Beattie, none of them have been charged with anything. None of them have admitted any offences. However, you know, there's an atmosphere that these kind of situations produce. So my question to you, James, is what are the people of Scotland feeling about watching this ongoing psychodrama? The most important politician in Scottish history, arguably, now currently under arrest. Her husband was arrested. The chief treasurer of the party was arrested. It gives it's a bad look. What are the people of Scotland feeling about this? Are they feeling this is time up for the SNP?
Yeah, it feels like that. It's not just this particular story. You know, it's the story of gender identity as well. It's, you know, the hate crime bill and so on. There's a number of things that the SNP have done in terms of policy over the last few years where it feels like they've run out of time. They're not in the mood in keeping with what the Scottish public want. I mean, this is, you know, so it's parallels to what's happening at Westminster with that, where it feels like the Tory government have run out of steam as well. I think taking a step back, whether you're in Scotland, whether you're in England, whether you're in Wales, Northern Ireland, it feels like we've got politicians, either in government or in opposition, who are not really addressing the issues that are facing people around the country, particularly things around the cost of living crisis. We seem to have the worst politicians at exactly the worst time. We don't seem to have much of an alternative. And so people are getting disenfranchised. They want politicians who act in their best interest, not in the interest of themselves. And what's happening at Westminster and in Scotland right now, not just with this particular story, but it's going back a bit, I think the general mood, not just in Scotland, but right across the UK, is that we do not have any political party or a lot of individuals within those parties who are actually giving a credible alternative. Where is the credible alternative? I suggest that the silent majority in this country roughly want the same things, but they're not being listened to. We've got a bunch of politicians and parties who are knee-deep in certain issues. They're basically not in step with the mood of the nation and not coming up with any answers. So the next year's election, it will be interesting because I think every seat is sort of up for grabs on a seat-by-seat basis, but that's largely because people are disenfranchised. There isn't a clear alternative which is in keeping with what most people want, and I find that quite saddening.
Indeed. Well, we're going to keep everybody posted on what's happening with Nicola Sturgeon. As I say, she's in an unidentified police station at the moment. She presented herself there and was duly arrested. She's being interrogated. We will keep you up to speed on all developments on that story as it develops over the next couple of hours. Let's talk about the psychodrama south of the border now, James, the Boris Johnson saga. I mean, where to start, really? I mean, he sensationally quit, saying that he's the victim of a stitch-up and a kangaroo court. Nadine Dorries has followed suit. She suddenly quit. So has Nigel Adams. They're both Boris loyalists. Now, there's all sorts of significant elements to Boris Johnson's departure, but possibly the most significant is the fact he started lobbing grenades, political grenades, at his successor, Rishi Sunak, in his 1,000-word statement as he left, talking about how, you know, he's been ganged up on, he's the victim of a stitch-up kangaroo court. But he also said, you know, this Prime Minister is not ruling this country like a Conservative Prime Minister. He railed against high taxes. This is a high-tax government. He railed against this being an interfering, huge government. This is not Tory. And he basically said, I'll be back. So Rishi Sunak, this has presented Rishi Sunak with an enormous problem, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, who knows? There's all kinds of rumours going on about what Johnson's going to do next. I mean, there's nothing so dangerous as someone who's got nothing to lose, and Johnson's now in that position. And there's rumours he might set up a new party or whatever. If he went down that route, the only real winner of that will be Keir Starmer again. You know, seems to be falling in Starmer's favour at the moment.
Yeah, he's just got to sit around doing nothing, old Keir, hasn't he?
You just let the enemies destroy themselves. You know, if Labour can pick up 25 seats in Scotland when, you know, the SNP are destroying themselves and the Tories are doing the same thing, then Labour win the next election.
Yeah.
You know, silence is the best approach for Starmer. He doesn't need to do anything right now. But back to Johnson. I mean, I see this two ways, actually. I think Johnson has been stitched up. I mean, he was stitched up going right back to the whole, you know, the power grab by Rishi. You know, Rishi Sunak effectively brought down two prime ministers. But the other side of Johnson is that Johnson, you know, he's the author of his own misfortune. You know, he was less than straight about Partygate. He was caught up in that when everyone else in the country were having to do their bit and lock everything down and close their businesses. Meanwhile, there's loads of collateral damages. The government were behaving as if they were clinking glasses and the only hospitality units that were open in the country around Whitehall. Johnson wasn't straight with that. And he ever since that point, he's been struggling. But it's not a surprise because Johnson's entire career was a bit like that. It's a bit duplicitous. You know, he's a charlatan. And actually what the statement over the last couple of days is in keeping with Johnson as well. It's narcissistic. Instead of taking full responsibility and saying, you know, I didn't handle this well, I wasn't straight with people, he's playing the victim. Yeah. I do think there was manoeuvres to get rid of him, though. So you see it both ways. And yet again, it comes back to that point. We've got whether Johnson or Sunak or what side are people going to go on. It's like Game of Thrones at Westminster, rather than politicians who should be doing what they're paid to do. And that's actually do things that improve the country, rather than plotting to work out who the next leader's going to be. It's just so unedifying.
Yeah, there's a part of me that with Johnson, and I think, you know, we've lost, you know, a big star from Westminster. Whatever you think about him, this guy is a massive star, and in that respect, the whole Westminster scene is somewhat diminished by his departure. But there's a part of me I just think, well, serves you right. You know, these stupid rules, this rule of 6, 4 yards from your friends, shut your windows, all this nonsense that he imposed on us during the lockdowns because Sage told him to. The rules were so complicated, so ridiculous, so difficult to understand that he broke them himself. So there's an element of this where I just think, well, serves you right, you're hoisted by your own petard. But, for God's sake, James, he's been punished enough. He lost the Prime Ministership effectively over this because he had a couple of drinks in Downing Street during the lockdowns. So he lost everything. And now they're not finished with him yet. They're kicking him when he's down. They want him destroyed. He effectively is saying, and let me know what you think about this, he's saying that I'm being established, or rather, I'm being punished by the Remainer establishment for being the father of Brexit. I mean, do you think he's got a point?
I think he probably does, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, to see both sides of the problem. You know, cheeks are the same backside. You know, it's all about a power grab and plotting and the rest of it. But I think he is actually right on this. I think there has been huge attempts to get rid of him. Beyond sort of getting Brexit done and through the COVID era, you know, Sunak has been on manoeuvres for a very long time. You know, Sunak that started all of this with Johnson, and then because Liz Truss actually won, they manoeuvres to get rid of her pretty quickly as well. And here we are with Sunak, a prime minister that no one really wanted apart from Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
And his alaka-doos around him. And I think Sunak will pay a price for that in the next election. But, you know, I mean, Sunak is not blameless. And remember when Sunak came in? This is the man of integrity, the man of transparency, the man of action. Well, where's his vision? Yeah. The only vision he's got is the one inside his head that he was entitled to be prime minister. So I think Johnson does have a point on this.
Yeah.
And the fact that I think there has been manoeuvres to get rid of him. But he's put himself in this position. I mean, if you take a step back from Johnson, you know, comments of the last few days, the Tories had a majority of 80 after the last election. He should have been completely bulletproof for the entire time of this parliament with a majority like that. So he's actually created this mess from something and enabled the circumstances for the likes of Sunak to create this sort of mission creep towards his own power. Johnson put himself in this position because he wasn't straight on a number of different issues. But he should never have been in that position with a majority of 80, which actually Johnson and his salesmanship managed to achieve. A lot of Tory MPs should be very, very thankful of Johnson. If it wasn't for Johnson, they would never have been MPs at the last election. But it's amazing how quickly things change. And one thing we know about history with the Tory party is whenever they think a prime minister is in trouble or a leader is in trouble, they get rid of them pretty quickly. And that's effectively what's happened with Johnson. And we left with Sunak, who doesn't have a mandate. The British public don't buy into him the same way they bought into Johnson. And I think Sunak ultimately will pay a price in next year's general election.
Yeah, he's being seen by Tories, furious Tories, as the man who stabbed Boris Johnson in the back a couple of years ago when he resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer. And now he's being seen as the man who stabbed Boris Johnson in the back again by telling the Tory party, the Parliamentary Tory party, we accept the Privileges Committee's verdict that he did lie to Parliament, and we are not going to challenge the punishment. So the punishment will almost certainly be, or would have been, 10 days or more suspension, which would have triggered a by-election in Uxbridge. And, of course, make no mistake, Boris isn't storming out as a brave warrior. He's storming out because he was terrified he would have lost that by-election, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with Johnson, that the Tories seem to have forgotten, and I'm no fan of Johnson. You know, I think it's another sad situation of British politics. We end up with people like Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. That in itself should never have happened. It's ludicrous that someone like Boris Johnson end up as Prime Minister. He's not got the personality for it. He's not got the attention to detail. He's not straight with the British people, not even straight with his own MPs. But the one thing Johnson has, which most Tories do not have, is that he does connect with a wide range of voters. And that's why they're trying to finish him off completely now. Because if Johnson did set up another political party, while it would split that vote, he would garner a lot of support. He does have the, you know, people can deny this all they want. You know, Starmer, Labour, Tories don't like Johnson. But the one thing Johnson does have is he can sell. Yeah. He does connect with a certain...
He's popular still, James. You know, he's still a vote winner. And Rishi Sunak is going to discover that he is very much not a vote winner. He doesn't, you know, you talk about Boris Johnson not having the right personality to be a prime minister. You may well be right. But Rishi Sunak does not have the right personality to campaign, to win votes, to win elections.
That's it. The gold dust of a political leader is someone who looks competent, acts competent, but also sprinkles magic dust of charisma across the nation. We've had very few of those, but they're the ones that win elections time and time again. You could argue Tony Blair had that actually in the early part of the Blair years. You could argue that Margaret Thatcher had that as well. But you can also argue, without the competency bit, that Boris Johnson has an ability to win elections. His career is full of it, you know, in terms of what happened with Brexit, London Mayor, last general election. I don't think there's anyone in the Tory party who can do that. And I think Sunak, as you touched on, Kevin, will realise that at the next election next year.
I think he will, and I don't think we've seen the last of Boris Johnson. James, sorry we were curtailed a bit, but you understand, breaking news and all that.